Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. People who have practiced or witnessed acts of the occult, voodoo, or witchcraft. What are some of the strangest, most unexplainable things you've seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was the victim of a bear walker. In First Nations culture, a bear walker is someone who used our sacred medicines for bad and not good. They can make someone very sick. Only a medicine man may reverse it, and it often comes as a gamble for the bear walker. Once reversed, they will suffer more than the one they made sick. I was 20 years old and very healthy. One night I had a dream I was in a field and was picking wild flowers from each direction. A tornado was coming at me. I woke up in a fevered sweat. That began 2 months of sheer misery. My doctor kept saying that I had a UTI. She would give me antibiotics, and it would subside for a while. I lost 40 pounds in the span of 2 months. By the end of it, I couldn't walk, barely ate. Finally, my mom got tired of it. My sister bundled me up, and we went to the hospital. Though an earlier ultrasound showed nothing, there was a huge growth on my ovary. A few days later, I had surgery, and when the doctor came to visit me, he said he never saw anything like it. It was a yellow, almost concrete-like substance around my ovary. I got better. But my mother remained unconvinced and scheduled an appointment with a medicine man. We gave him tobacco, and he smoked a pipe and sang a song. He said something along the lines of a woman seeing me at a powwow. She became interested in who I was because of my mother. She threw a piece of medicine in my path. I stepped on it and went up the right leg. He asked me if I still felt it. I said yes. He took a bone, what kind I am not sure, placed it in the area and began to suck. Weird, I know. He started vomiting yellow, like the doctor said. He gave me medicines and rituals for my mom to do. I went home that night and slept for 13 hours. My sickness never returned. This happened a few years ago. I was on a dating site and matched with an attractive person, so I started chatting. We made it to the plans tonight part of the conversation, and she told me she was going to play hide and seek with Fluffy, pointing out the item in their second profile picture. A bloody rabbit mask. Okay, let's be weird. So I played along until she mentioned that they would be playing in my basement. I thought, how in the hell? Wild guess, probably. I lied and told her I didn't have a basement. Immediately she texted, oh yeah? And I heard, Snicklefritz booming from the basement. I won't lie to you, Reddit. I about shit myself. Obviously, I blocked her and froze for an hour before I gathered the courage to check my completely enclosed from the outside basement. I didn't find anything, thankfully. I didn't have a smart device at all and didn't have any speakers that could have been hacked. I didn't even have wireless internet at the time. The basement was completely empty. I can't explain it in the slightest. Well, I'm not going to say that if I knew one of my friends was on a dating app, you could kind of catfish them into something like that because it would be hilarious, a little mean, so probably a prank, but I don't know. Maybe demons. I went to a voodoo shop in New Orleans that had a lot of signs up that said no pictures. My boyfriend's mom wanted some voodoo dolls and wanted to see pictures of them before he bought it. I told him not to because I had a bad feeling about it. Immediately after taking the picture, his cell phone lost signal. Mine was totally fine. He couldn't send the picture, so we walked outside and a car drove by and splashed him with water, but I was dry. Freaked us out. I told him to delete the pictures, and we had to buy 2 dolls he took pictures of. A mother effing ghost pulled my father from the ankles out of his bed when he was sleeping because he didn't want to go to his aunt's funeral that same week. My mom was with him, of course, and woke up to see how he just was in the middle of this bed with his legs dangling outside, and he was scared, pale from fear. We have had so many paranormal stuff happen to us. Maybe it's because where we live. When I was a teen, a bunch of my friends went through a Wiccan phase. I honestly thought it was a bunch of hooey, but played along for the most part because, hey, they could have gotten drugs or horses instead, right? But despite thinking it's bullshit, there was one moment that made me question things. Us girls had met up to hang out, and one was brandishing a wooden walking stick. I've poured my energy into this totem, she declared, then started passing it around the room. The others cooed about how they could feel the power within as they held it. Of course, someone handed me the stick eventually. I could barely contain my eye roll as I took it. As I held the walking stick, it sent a tingling sensation up my arms. I passed it on quickly. Not as dramatic as some of the stories here, but gosh, that was weird. Not sure if this counts, but when I was in high school, I had this sudden bout of nightmares and sleep paralysis. I wasn't going through a stressful time or anything, and I don't freak out easily. I grew up watching 80s and 90s horror films, and I normally sleep with total darkness and doors closed. These nightmares were super sudden and happened almost every night. It was constant sleep paralysis where my room was on fire, or there were bats thrashing around above me, or there was a figure hovering over my body and I couldn't breathe, classic. Sometimes my speakers let out strange frequency type sounds even when it was switched off. Things would fall off my shelves, etc. My mom would always find me sleeping on the couch the next morning with the TV on because it was so crazy. Suddenly, it all stopped. And when I told my mom, she admitted that she had sought advice from a priestess who engraved a blessing for me on a silver pendant and instructed my mom to place it in my room. She didn't want to tell me to see if it would work. I've never had an episode since. I was about 13, and my grandma was a believer in spirits and witches, etc. Well, I had just pissed her off, and she told me I was going to pay. That night, I woke up at about 3 in the morning, and I saw a little kid with a green shirt on in my room. He stared at me for about a minute, and I couldn't look away. He then ran out of my room, straight through the door laughing. About 30 minutes later, another figure appeared in my room who looked about 15. He just stared at me and mumbled something, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't talk, scream, or move. I could only look. He then vanished into seemingly thin air. The next night I woke up at about the same time, and it sounded as if there were 50 people in my room screaming at me to kill myself, kill my family, and just a lot of negative thoughts in general. The next day, I got anointed, and it stopped. Later that day, I had to see my grandma, and I instantly started to get sick after I hugged her, and she just sat there with a smirk on her face. I then got anointed again, and it stopped. I still can't explain how she did it, but I still to this day am afraid to make my grandma mad. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm pretty sure your grandma's a dick. I said it. This is a pretty mundane story, but I feel it captures something of what real magic might be like. I used to work in an occult bookstore. We sold mostly psychic nonsense and spiritualist new age stuff. But there was a bookcase in the back with real expensive stuff, and the owner was this real old, real wise man. This woman used to come in when I was working, and she'd just talk for ages and ages. It was a non-stop stream of bullshit. She knew this. She did that. Did you know about this? On and on. She'd suck up a ton of time. If you've ever heard the term energy vampire, it would apply here. When she left, you just feel drained. One day, she comes in while the owner is there. She walks up to the counter and starts her shtick, and he's very polite and listening. But she just sort of runs out of steam, like within 60 seconds. She hums and haws a bit and then walks out of the store. It would usually take me an hour to get rid of her, and she shut her down in a minute flat, with a smile on his face. I mentioned it to him, and he says, "There's a circle of protection painted under the floor for a reason." Kid I was friends with in high school was jumped on by 2 separate occasions. First, a mutual friend lured him outside his house where a large group of dudes waited. One of them jumped him and beat him fairly badly. Second was a very high school meet-me-after-school type fight, which my friend won, and was subsequently jumped by the fight loser boxer friend. That one, he got severely effed up. So, fast forward a year or so, he and I have kinda grown apart. He tells me he's getting into Satanism and made a pact to sell his soul. He asked for 3, the one that lured him, the loser of the second fight, and the boxer, to all be killed. Luring guy died in a freak car accident 2-ish years later, thrown from the back of a topless Jeep. Loser of the second fight died 4-ish years later, heroin OD. Boxer died 4-ish years later, don't know. We're in our mid-40s now. He's married with a kid. All probably total coincidence, but at the time it was like, what the F did you do? My sister is really into the occult, Wiccan, witchcraft kind of stuff. I think she meant to be Wiccan, but a 13-year-old isn't incredibly discerning. Around the time she got into it, our house started to get incredibly creepy. We would see things move out of the corner of our eyes. Nobody wanted to be home alone. Nobody wanted to be in the living room at night. At first, we could blame it on the house and the land. Then we moved, not just houses, but continents. The weird stuff followed. All of it was always centered around my sister and her room. and it was always aggravated when we did serious cleaning, and especially when we moved. The height of it was when we were moving back to the US. We had 2 different flight groups. My mom and sisters left 6 weeks before the rest of us to pick the new house, while my dad, brother, and I cleaned and packed at the old house. We heard thumping from my sister's room. The windows and doors would open and close on their own, not possible from just the wind, and shadows would move wildly under the door pretty much every night, even with the blinds closed. I'm not sensitive, discerning of that kind of stuff, but it was plain as day, even to me. It was only my sister finally moved out of our next house and we cleaned out her room that it all ended. Whatever it was tied to my sister and any sort of disorder or uncleanliness. I rented a house a few years back and never believed in paranormal or any sort of spirits or etc. My first week in the house was fine, a few creaks here and there, but nothing major. I very soon started to feel like I was being watched or just a presence in general. The third week, I started walking up in the middle of the night with large scratches, almost cuts, going through the length of my arm. From my wrist to my armpit, 3 scratches all parallel, always on my right arm. I didn't think much of it. One night I hear a loud bang, go to the back and notice my back door was open. Okay, no worries. I shut and lock the door with the deadbolt. Next morning I wake up and the door is wide open, but the freaky part, the deadbolt is still in a locked position, as well as the knob. It really starts to freak me out now. I start telling a person I work with about this stuff. He told me his sister was a Native American shaman priestess, whatever it was, and she would come sage bless my house if I wanted. The next week she came over, and I believe it was called sweetgrass and sage. She burned the sage walking around and told me can definitely feel a presence in the house. She hung the sweetgrass over my bed, and ever since, I haven't had anything strange happen. Very strange. Well, as someone who believes anything is possible, but a Native American shaman, that sounds pretty awesome. Both my husband and I have family members who have a little magic. One, I was staying with my grandma so she could help me with the baby. I had a bad toothache and waiting for an appointment. Up late with pain, trying to be quiet so I don't wake anyone. My 2-year-old calls for me. I bend over the playpen and she puts her tiny hand on my cheek and said, "Poor mama." That instant, the pain was gone. 2, I was helping my cousin move into his first apartment. When I pulled into the parking lot, my daughter looked up from her dolls, said monsters live there. She spent the day talking to her friends from behind the curtain. I didn't tell my cousin about the monsters. He moved out after 20 days. 3, when I was 20, I had a detailed dream that I was talking to a little girl. "We have to save him." "Who?" I asked. She looks over the side of the raft, and in the black oily water, a baby boy is floating. I pick him up and hold him in my lap. The girl smiles and tells me, "I'm glad we picked you." 3 years later, I have a daughter and a newborn son who look just like the kids in my dream. 4, when I was 13, my future sister-in-law spent the night. We were up late and noticed the corners of my room getting darker. It kept closing in and we got scared. We went down to the living room and sat close to each other. That is when we saw a large rotten fox walking on its hind legs outside the picture window. It looked at us for a long time before it walked away. I have a lot more. Safe to say, I believe in the possibility of a world just outside of notice. When I first became a pagan, when I was 15 or 16, I celebrated Ostara by leaving an offering to the Fae outside on a wooden slab in my garden, which was fenced off and only accessible by going into it from the house. The offering was a little cake made with eggs and flowers, and the next morning it was gone, and in its place was a witch's whisk, a bundle of blackberry sticks bound with a vine or something. None of my family members, mom and her husband, were home that day I left the offering, and neither had any idea as to where it could have come from. I believe them because my mom is terrified of the paranormal and her husband is straight-laced and humorless, not the kind of guy to pull pranks whatsoever. To this day, I still have it. I'll post pictures if anyone wants to see. Yes, please. My grandmother grew up in post-World War II Nagasaki. Her family actually saw the bomb drop from their house in the mountains outside of the city. There was some mysticism stuff that was passed down in her family. Some of it was fortune-telling. By the time it made it to my grandmother's generation, they just started using a deck of 54 with jokers playing cards. Before that, they used different types of cards or sticks that were like dice. Something like that. She also did some readings of palms and the birthmarks that Asian babies have when they first born. Anyway, she would always say that the mysticism stuff was fake and only for entertainment purposes, that it was bullshit, and that it was a mix of cold reading and random coincidences with the cards. She would only do readings if you agreed it was only for fun. What was really weird was how accurate her readings were, despite her giving her disclaimer. My mom had an acquaintance that heard about this and asked to have a reading. My grandmother gave her a little speech and then starts with the card drawing. After a few minutes and looks up suddenly and says, "So I guess you want me to talk about your cheating husband and what you're going to do about it." About how it's going to affect your daughter. The lady nearly fell out of her chair with shock. My grandmother had only just met this lady, and my mother never mentioned her before. My mom didn't even know that this woman had a kid. The woman confirmed all that and was taken aback about it. My grandmother gave her whole speech again, entertainment only, yada yada, went on telling her more details. The person, the husband who was cheating on her, was someone the woman knew. The daughter would be fine. She predicted the sex of the next baby based on the birthmark of the older sibling on all my cousins. Asian babies have right above their butt when they are born. It goes away when they get older. She was always correct for 20 plus guesses. It's much debate on some of the other cousins if she actually predicted it. She claimed she couldn't remember every time she did it, but that too was for entertainment. The only time she didn't get it exactly right was because she said she couldn't tell because the birthmark was too faded, but it looked like both boy and girl. The cousin had twins, a boy and a girl. She said that this didn't count because it didn't look like twins. Someone in my family calculated the odds of her being right so many times, and it was really high, even with a 50% of going either way. A few times she had described things that happened in other people's dreams. I once visited her and she asked why I kept dreaming about my teeth falling out of my mouth and why it was reoccurring. I didn't tell anyone about that. She just kind of smiled and told me not to worry about that and just take care of my teeth. She would read palms and tell people about their luck, lifelines, and how many kids they would have. Once she was really sad, and the lady asked why. Again, with the "this is only entertainment," but she saw that the lady would have 5 children, but 2 miscarriages. She even saw the order that it happened in, and the woman did have 5 kids with the miscarriages in the order my grandma saw. Some of the time, my grandmother would make predictions or say that she couldn't read the fortune or that it was too uncertain, but the time she had gotten it right had been really accurate. If you ask her how or why, she still says she's in it for entertainment and just nonsense and random. She wanted to teach my mom and sister, but my mom is hardcore Christian and doesn't want to learn. Apparently my grandmother only wants to teach the females in the family. I'm really sad to say this, that weird, usual, just for entertainment thing she does will die with her.